get ready to throw down.
Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Friday at lunch, so we're here again talking about what's going on in the week. And last week, I ended with talking about a huge botched sales call that I had, and you guys have been hanging for a week. So let me tell what happened. So my contact was a salesperson. They wanted me to come in and help out their company, fairly large company in the insurance world. And we got on the call, and I knew his pain points. I knew why it was important to him. And so he got me on the call with his head of sales and the head of the whole Texas market. And I hopped on this call, and I did not do a good job of figuring out if they had any pain points. I just jumped straight into presentation mode. Let me tell you why we're awesome and everything else like this. And the call didn't go very well, ended up being a no. But after the call, I was talking with my, white knight internal champion who brought me into it. And he asked me how I thought I did on the call. And I said, well, I think I would give myself about a 4, honestly, on a scale of 1 to 10. And he said, why? We kind of talked about it. But the thing is I didn't take any time at all to try to figure out if there were pain points of these other people who were new to the call, right? And when you're selling to larger companies and you're not dealing directly with the decision maker from jump, that's a key part of this that sometimes we forget, because we make an assumption that, oh, my person has brought me in, I can just present, it's going to be great. And that isn't always the case. And I know that Al and Clint and Annette all have to deal with that a lot more than I do. So how do you guys make sure that you're not jumping ahead of yourselves when you're brought in to talk to the actual decision maker?
I mean, first step for me is always recap, right? I mean, that's like, if you've ever, if somebody else is introducing you into the mix, the first thing to do is sit down and say, okay, I don't know if everybody's heard or not what me and Michael, let's say, have talked about, but here's what we've said. Does everybody understand, agree? Like that's pretty first step, for me in any situation.
Yeah, I did not recap at all, right? And the recap is a great way to kind of get into there to make sure that your understanding is correct and to see very, very naturally and nurturingly if you're ready to talk about additional pain points and things like that. I mean, it's kind of like setting expectations and just getting everybody on the same page. And I jumped straight past that. I just jumped straight into, let me tell you why we do what we do. And part of that was because I knew that my referrer or my internal champion had kind of set the stage for me, right? They had done all of this. So I made a mistake of just jumping in there, assuming that their pain was the same as his pain, which it's not going to be in a lot of cases, right? The end user that you are helping with your solution or service is going to have pains that don't show up or are not realized a couple of steps up the ladder. So
to me, a huge thing that you're saying, a huge lesson learned is never assume. How often do we assume what someone else is thinking or assume what is going to take place? And we're completely wrong. So, and I'm not trying to, ostracize you or anything. I'm just like, okay, make sure we get that, because that assumption thing can really blow up our sales.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is sometimes we rest on our laurels when we have an intermediary, right? And it isn't our groundwork that we've laid to get to that meeting. Because if you did it, through, your own endeavors, then every step of the way. If you're relying on somebody else to make that introduction, do the frontline work, sometimes we get a little lazy because we rule by abdication. We gave it over to them to set the tempo. And so we come in with just our delivery, instead of making sure that this other person, maybe we know them a little bit, maybe we don't know them well at all, has done the work that we need for the setup for our delivery.
Yeah.
And another thing that I'm thinking of is, in the past, I've shared that someone, particularly a boss, will say, gosh, this isn't really working well. What about this? And I know my client, and I know the office everyone else in the office. So I know what's going on. He's not really, or she, whomever your boss is, of course, maybe doesn't understand the dynamics of the office. So that's another thing. Don't assume just because your boss is telling you to go another route, you should know your like I said, the dynamic of the office, what everyone's, what they're going to expect of you. So a lot of times you have to read that as well. Like I said, in the past, I've told the story where my boss told me, no, it is time to do this. And I was like, no, I don't think it's time to do this. You know, you need to know those things.
You know, the interesting thing for me was that I left that call knowing that I did not do a very good job, right? And I didn't have any problem talking with the person who brought me in about the fact that I did not do a very good job, because I didn't follow my own process, right? Like I know how I'm normally supposed to handle these calls, but because of the situation and it feeling a little bit awkward, I jumped ship to what was going to be comfortable, right? And when you're in sales, it's always easier to present, right? And just talk about how great you are. Whereas, you know, it can be uncomfortable at times to really kind of dig in and look for pain and ask questions and, you know, be a little bit vulnerable in the fact of like, I don't know everything about your business, right? And I totally bypassed all of that and just jumped straight into what was going to be easy. So the thing to remember about this is sometimes you have to dial it all the way back. I mean, like this week, I've kind of made sure that my process is laid out very, very cleanly. It's right here in front of me. So that way I don't get ahead of myself, right? I don't jump the gun. I don't go to what's easy. I was got something.
Quick question, John. Do you think part of this might have been a little bit of desperation coming out of our current situation where, because I think sometimes we get unseated and lose our edge because we need the business. We just really need the business. And so we revert to some of those old things that you know, vomiting our process just to get it out there, and just kind of shortchange sitting back and going through the route that we know that's the most successful. You know, biting down on that pain and making sure everybody in the room has given us everything we need to find out how to solve what their real problem is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that it's. I mean, at some level, scarcity comes into that, right? Or else, why would I have jumped the gun and not done it the way that I normally would do it? So, of course, there's a little bit of that, but I think really what it comes down to was it was just different enough that I felt like I was not prepared, right? Which is my own fault, right? I have to take ownership of that, right? Because normally I am pretty prepared for calls. I know kind of the flow of it, what we're going to talk about, what good outcomes look like and stuff. But this with not dealing directly with the decision maker, which is what I'm used to, and instead dealing with a champion who gets me to the decision maker, was just different enough that I felt unprepared, and therefore it went badly, right? But of course, you know, wanting a deal and my sense of urgency comes into play. You know, this very specifically is around, you know, marketing and lead generation, because we do that for some clients. And the really interesting thing about that is that part of me just doesn't really understand why people don't trust marketing. Like, I get it, but on some levels it's like, you're going to see everything we're doing as far as the deliverables. So, you know, there's not like some kind of old school marketing thing where I'm going to sell you a catalog ad and we just hope for the best, right? Like, you're going to see all the prospecting and lead generation that we're doing. You're going to get reports and everything else. So there's not really any way to not know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But at the end of the day, that wasn't what was important to these guys, right? These guys are probably thinking, oh, well, my salespeople shouldn't need to be paying for lead generation. They should just be going out and generating their own leads. And since I didn't do a good enough job of, you know, talking around, hey, how hard is it for your guys to be generating leads in this environment? You know, and is that a struggle? And with people working from home, like, is that getting in the way of the prospecting volume that's necessary? I didn't do any of that. I was like, this is why we're here. Let's talk about why I'm awesome and everything else. So
can you speak to what industry you were talking to? I mean, what was the dynamic of the company you were, you know, giving your presentation to?
Commercial insurance.
Okay. So you say commercial as in liability insurance for businesses, or
everything.
Okay.
Cyber,
so,
you know, all that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, you know.
Can you go back, or is it a closed sale? Like, can you go back?
It's never, in my thing, or in my view of it, it's never a no for forever. It was just a no for now, right?
Okay.
But what actually happened was I ended up going back to the person who brought me in, and we had a really cool conversation about what I messed up on that call, because he was interested about why I graded it so low. And then we also talked about a way of him starting off on a smaller scale, doing this lead generation package that I offer to people, so that way he can pay for it just out of his own pocket, right? Which was kind of one of the agreements that we had made before. I said, hey, if we take this to these guys and they say no, what happens then? He's like, well, if we can figure out a way that I can pay for it myself, then we'll just go about it that way. So we're in the process of kind of customizing the package a little bit, so that way it fits this guy's, particular need, also his wallet, so that way he doesn't have to go through his company anymore, which is something that I've been doing with some other people that, they don't really want to go the way because budgets are tight and everyone's kind of locking down spending. But the people that I'm working with directly are like, well, I want more leads. Right. And if the leads are good, I'm happy to pay for them. Right. Okay. So what does good mean? Right. And then we kind of go through that process and take it from there.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So it wasn't a failure in the long run. It just was not a great call. And that's important, right? Because, I would say that probably 4 years ago, I would have had that call and gotten off of it and felt like it was bad, and then not been able to capitalize on the other option there. Right. Because I would have felt either shameful or not taking ownership of it, and it wouldn't have served me at all.
I wouldn't worry about it. I fail on phone calls 50 times a week. I'm not too worried about it.
Sure.
You move on,
Yeah.
you buck up, you learn from it. Who cares? The thing is even on a big whale, it's like the fact that you got to one means you can get to another, right? So
Absolutely.
you just buckle down and do it different.
Yeah.
Very good. I like it.
I completely agree. But you bring up a good point where you're aware of some of the deficiencies, and then you start, formulating, well, how do I prevent that from happening again? And so self-awareness is, I think, a key step in owning why things went bad. I mean, unlike the current administration that doesn't want to own anything, I think personally we all need to
stay on topic. Stay on topic.
How many of our viewers just left? Right. Well, there's 3 other guys that agree with you guys. So anyway,
I'm about to leave.
So yeah, though the thought of, where did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? I think that moves you so much further down the road than either not going back and assessing, or putting the blame where it probably shouldn't be. And if you come out of that saying, wow, it wasn't a good fit, maybe because of size and capabilities, learn how to get to size and capabilities, because that's what allows you to know what that next level up in every one of our industries are.
Yeah, there's also a personality portion to this too, because what you did, John, with that call is exactly what a C would do, right?
Oh yeah.
Al is probably going to blow that right off and just, hey, get the next one, right? And then
yes,
naturally, well, I get it. You personally, I'm talking about an I, like a hardcore I is just going to say, whatever.
Yeah, fuck it and move on down the road.
Yep, move on down the road. And and then I don't know how you really handle that, because I can't see in your perspective even in a 1% margin.
Well, I was shocked when you said the encouraging word to John. I was like, oh, okay, because I was wondering, do you just act like it didn't happen, or do you?
Well, so
that's actually funny though, Nan. That because Clint, I can see Clint go had to think about, well, maybe.
It's funny because I literally have phone calls all the time, and amongst us in the office, they'll say, well, how'd that phone call go? And I say, yeah, we're not calling that guy back at all.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a fine line though, because I think if you're not taking that time after calls to sit down and think about, okay, what did I do well? What did I do badly? What do we need to improve on next time? You're not being honest with yourself, right? And what that leads to, well, that's their fault, right? And having that kind of jaded entitledness, which doesn't really help you as a salesperson.
Not to interrupt, but Clint hit on something about how Nan would handle this. And I can tell you, since Nan and I work closely together on a lot of accounts, she beats herself up too much about it, right? And lays too much of the blame in her corner sometimes, to where I'm like, it just wasn't a fit. You did everything. You jumped through all the hoops. We gave them the contracts. I mean, we've got a couple accounts like that just Nan struggles for the fact that they're either not ready or it's not a good fit. And in our industry, we get a lot of maybes, if you will, or if we let it go there. And sometimes you can't get them off a maybe. They're a surgeon, they're just not ready to decide. They're not telling you no. You could call on them every day of the week and they'd probably still come out and see you. They don't dislike you. They are just not ready to move in any direction at that point.
Yeah, and you can go, John, you mentioned on your phone call talking about pain, right? We talk about that a lot, finding that thing that really sells us to them. And I'll tell you, in my business, everybody says the same three things, and it's all bullshit. And it's on every phone call, and I can't even listen to a word they're saying because 99% of the time it's price, right? But nobody ever mentions that. So they talk about safety and they talk about, getting the job done on time, but at the end of the day, it's always price. And if you focus your pain around in your phone call around all those pains, all they're doing is feeding you full of shit to get the number so they can compare it to a competitor at the end of the day. So for me, filtering through that, and just not buying into it is huge for me.
Yeah.
So Clint, if you go into your sales process knowing that, how long do you coddle that along? Because I don't see you as a guy that really coddles that crap very far.
2 seconds.
Okay. So what's that conversation like whenever I'm saying, well, safety? I mean, how do you break it? How do you get to the point?
I usually started off besides the top three, right? What else gets us there? or the fact of like, hey, everybody says that. What else is something that gets you, right? And it's those things that they really got to dig in their repertoire for stuff. So,
do you ever use a third-party story where you get their three and then you go, funny you say that because most of the time it boils down to price in my arena.
Yeah, I don't focus on that too much. I know we talk about it a lot. It doesn't really. I'm pretty cautious about it. Construction's kind of I would say a pretty cocky industry where if you start talking about other people and how they do it, everybody thinks they do it the best anyway. So you got to be careful in those lines.
Same in our arena with these surgeons, Yeah, Nan can attest to this because she's brought other surgeons' names up, and I'm like, no, they may hate each other's guts, right? Because they both think they're demigods, in the same swimming pool. And,
I told you, I've told the story before. Not that this is really sales related, but I'm in the OR. I have 3 surgeons working the same hall, and I'm trying to separate my feelings about each of them, and not to. And then I just went, screw it. I like all 3 of these guys. I'm just gonna be myself. But I did see them kind of step back and go, oh, I guess. And I was concerned for a minute that could affect my sales, but that's silly. You can just assume, like we talked about earlier, the wrong thing, and you just have to just do it. As I said, I'm totally shocked when a few minutes ago when Clint encouraged John. I was like, because literally I'm sitting there thinking, Clint and probably Al just say screw it, and they don't really own that they didn't do. They're not going to sound like John just did, or I would, if we feel like we failed. But maybe I'm assuming the wrong thing because.
So it's funny because I think you hear compassion, right? And there's 0 there. All it is task. It's shut up and get to the next.
Yeah.
One, right?
Okay. That makes sense.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. But go ahead, John.
Well, what I was going to say was, Clint hit the nail on the head, right? I was feeling some pressure. So what I did was I reverted back to C-ness, right? Facts, figures, logic of it, right? Whereas Clint would not have gone to that space when he was feeling pressure, right? He's going to D up, right? And be like, hey, if you don't see value in this, cool, we should close it. Right. I think,
the other side of it too is when my biggest weakness is embarrassment. I hate to be embarrassed. My face would have got red. I'd have known I screwed it up and I would just dump it. Right. And this is forever gone in my head because it does me no good. Like to sit here and dote on it. You just got to get rid of it. Right. You take the 1 or 2 points. You don't do, the bad points. You don't do it again. You just move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that's a whole lot easier for some personalities to say versus others, but that's the way I deal with it.
So before we
That's good.
started, Jill was talking about some of the stuff that she's seeing. Jill leads a team of salespeople in the banking industry, and was talking about this pressure that we're probably most people are feeling around this idea of like, let's just busy, like just busy for the sake of being busy, right? And there's a big difference between being busy and being productive, right? And so I was feeling that same way, honestly, right? And Melissa, who's right here off camera, and if you're watching on Facebook, if you have a question or comment, put it in there because Melissa will read it and we'll talk about it on the show. Was that like I was doing 10, 12-hour days, like all right here in this room, and really not feeling like I was getting a whole lot of stuff done. And so I kind of had to go all the way back to, KPIs, and every day I show up with like a task list of the things that I have to do before I can let myself go on any kind of shiny thing, exploration things around the business. And that has been incredibly helpful, right? So knowing my KPIs and then also having this list of like, these are the big things that I have to do today. And then prioritizing that is really leading me to having to spend less time in here at the desk, which is helpful for, family life, but also just feeling like I've got more control. And right now in these times, it's super easy to feel like you don't have any control over anything, right? And just scrambling around, running around, trying to get something done. Whereas, just sitting down and writing this out and like rewriting my KPIs for the new things that I need to be doing have given me back control. So I no longer feel like I'm at the whim of my work, right? I feel like I'm in control and running it well. So are you guys dealing with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, to the point of, just being busy to be busy, I think everybody is falling into that trap right now with this, especially working from home. People are almost justifying their positions at this point by sending stupid emails, just to send an email, right? Copying everybody so that everybody thinks that they're working at 7 a.m. and then going back to bed or whatever. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that stuff, Yeah, exactly. Doc's that guy. But, I think
wake
that,
up at 4, shoot out some emails, sleep till noon, get up,
Yep.
eat lunch, and get on this thing, right?
that sounds like a chiropractor if I've ever heard one.
Baby, no, dude, no. I saw patients this morning. I've got to go back and see some more. So no, it's all hands on deck, man. We're actually, we're shaking the weeds, and like you said, we see some areas of our business has started to decline. And we've been making phone calls, letting people know. Nan and I went around to attorneys' offices, dropped off flyers. We're shoving them through mail slots. I have found that if you get proactive about more business during these times, again, I said that last week, if you're out there and you're in people's ears, then the late arrivals get shoved to the side. You weren't here when we were hurting. You weren't calling me whenever the sky was falling. You're calling me now that we've come through this little issue. So no, I say now's the time to call everybody. Get on your phone. Anybody you spoke to before this, you need to be speaking to them more now than ever.
Yeah, and the other side of it too is typically when the economy's good and everything's up and rolling, you should be really selective on what you're putting through your process. And right now, you can't be too selective because we're eventually going to come out of this, and you need, typically we talk about backlog on the actual what we've won side, but you need a backlog of leads coming out of this, so
Yeah.
you can't be quiet and you can't be too selective right now. You gotta lead generate. So when you come out and everybody gets back to 100%, you gotta have that backlog of leads.
You're exactly right. And you have a topic that everybody will respond to. How are you surviving this crisis? And if you can't say just those few words and let somebody tell you what they're doing, then you don't have much of a relationship, and now you're cold calling. But everybody that you've done business with, everybody that has a clinic, everybody that's a supplier in the OR, how are you managing? It's the first words out of my mouth to anybody that I talk to. How are things going? And I mean it sincerely, because there'll be some that are surviving, some that aren't. And there's a lot of needs and a lot of wants and sometimes your capacity is limited. So now you got to start deciding, who can I help? Who can I not help? How do I save myself along the way? Mm-hmm. I mean, those are real issues that people really will open up about if you have a genuine heart and you approach it the right way with just about anybody.
Yeah. So Jill asked a question a second ago in the chat. Do you think that that is just because you're a C, John? Jill, I'm assuming you're asking about like going back to like basics of like the KPIs of the process. And yeah, right. It is easier for me because I know that I thrive better in those situations already. I know that for people like Al and for Clint, like the idea of writing out, weekly cadences of, activity counts and behavior counts and stuff like that is not, I mean, it's like pulling teeth. We were talking about this topic and Clint just kind of like sank his head for a second because
Here's my behavior count.
exactly. So I do think it's easier for me, but the thing to remember is that even though that's like one of my strengths and one of the things that I can call back on, like I've spent last 2.5 weeks not doing this, and this is a fairly recent, okay, I got to get back in control of this thing, right? Because I wasn't taking care of my self-care. I wasn't really, hanging out with the family, and like I would work, and then just be wiped, and so like that's not super healthy either. So it's all about the balance of things. So doing this allows me to spend less time here, and I know that. But what happens is you most of this stuff you have to fail at, I think, to really see the value in doing, right? Which is kind of sales in general, right? If you have never lost a deal because you didn't talk about budget or money, then upfront, then you don't see any value in talking about it, right? So it's one of those things where I feel like you kind of have to get kicked in the teeth by it to really understand the value of it. But that being said, it is kind of my natural state, but you lose some part of your natural state when you're under pressure, depending upon what that pressure looks like, I think, right? Because I would say that probably Al right now is not spending as much time indulging his eye as he normally would, right? So I feel like maybe, and Al could speak to this better, right? He's probably maybe dealing with some of that same stuff of having a little bit of urgency that's different from his prospects and different from the people that he's working with, and that's kind of leading to some hurdles in the conversation. Do you think that's true, Al?
We carry pretty substantial ARs through the clinic. On the surgery side, not so much. We have done kind of a dual thing. We're looking for more business, but we're also looking for the money that we've already earned, and concerned that some of that may not come through. We've seen insurance companies go to a different model because they're out of the office. So we're trying to match that model because mail rooms, nobody's there anymore. We are still, we're watching our collections day by day. We have some new revenue generating things that are through telemedicine. We're exploring, are we getting paid for those codes? Because in healthcare, you bill a code to an insurance company, well, it's automatically processed. So is their system already set up to capture this code and push it on through? I mean, there's just a ton of nuances to dig through. And as a matter of fact, I said I'm going back to see patients. That's not exactly true. You guys saw the beer. I'm going back to do chart review and look at EOBs to determine what our cash flow is going to look like. I'm not going to go put my hands on anybody's neck after having and only one beer with lunch. But there's a real change in the dynamic of what we're focusing in on. It's not any different. It's just more scrutiny over the process of treatment, collection, who's going to surgery, what do those look like? Are any of the hospitals on credit hold before we go in there and put a bunch of product into somebody? I mean, I had that conversation before we started doing surgeries again. We did one in a smaller hospital, and the manufacturer was concerned about whether the viability of the hospital, how are they doing? Are they on credit hold for any reason? So yeah, those are a lot of our conversations now, and they all center around money. And so don't think going in here that money's not at the back of everybody's mind right now, both earning it and spending it. So address it. It's the elephant in the room.
So Al, for you, are there things that you normally do very well that you view as because of where you sit on disc that are a struggle for you to use or call upon now because of pressure or time scarcity or anything else like that?
My time management is really the toughest part for me. And, just sticking to and not letting small, delegating what I can so that I'm not having to pay attention to it. And making sure then to go back and make sure it got done, because we are, doing more with less. We've got some employees that had one on maternity leave. We've had one that broke a leg. Anyway, we've got some of those internal dynamics, but we've been able to keep everybody and, I just hired somebody yesterday because now I'm like, wait a second, we need somebody in that slot. And it hurts to bring on more payroll. It really does. Because it's that uncertainty. Will I be able to pay these people? If we can't get our newer clinic, if the volume doesn't come up, now I've got some decisions to make. So we're betting on the recovery. We're betting on everything coming back. I'm a gambler. I'm betting on the return to normal. And so we're staffed. We're sending bills out. We're doing the job that we're paid to do. But if another major company fails, or if the city of Fort Worth or Arlington or mid cities, if they declare bankruptcy or they lay police officers off, as long as they have a healthcare plan, we're still good. But all those are real dynamics to me. People need to have jobs so that they can have healthcare. It doesn't work the other way around. So, yeah.
What about for you, Clint? Are there aspects of the D state that you normally have access to that you don't right now, that you've noticed?
The realistic, the filter, right? What's real, because the economy is so unknown. So, when I look at a construction project before this, I definitely, had a better shot at saying that's not real. This is real. Let's chase that, gut feel. That gut feel is really gone, because I don't know how to judge it, because we've never seen it, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody gives me a job to look at or bid, it's like, man, I could go either way with this, and you drag it along more than you usually would.
Yeah. What about you, Nanette?
My biggest thing is just not camping in my comfort zone. Like when you were talking about you're staying in your office for 12 hours and, the first thing I thought of was, I like to do that. I like to be at home. I like having consistent, doing what I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm. And I think an analogy is that, like this morning I was looking online, like I've been walking. I've been really trying to walk a lot. And I was like, what's the best plan, how to make that advantageous? And it said, the article I was reading said, change it up. Don't do the same thing every day. Plan to do this one day and this another day and make it different. And I thought, that's so how my job needs to be. I don't need to just be comfortable. You just get acclimated to doing one thing. And then you're like, this is comfortable. This is good. I like this. Well, unfortunately, you can't do that. You have to do sales one day, make plans one day, change it up, because that's how you're going to be successful, doing the same thing every day. And that's what's good about Al. I think that he's so diversified. He has so many things. So it helps him be successful because he doesn't camp. And so I think that's a really big, important thing to do is change it up. Don't, schedule different things. Don't do, it can become very habit forming to do the wrong thing, even if it is the right thing initially. So I think that's really important. But anyway.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Don't take this time to create bad habits, right?
Yeah.
Or create limiting mindsets for your stuff about no one will buy my stuff, right? Just because you're getting a lot of no's right now doesn't necessarily mean that you have a bad offer or a bad product. It just means that you probably need to increase your lead generation prospecting behaviors, because attention is divided a lot more than it was, in December of last year. Right.
And to what Clint said earlier, I think it's so important. Also, I've always said, there's a million people out there. There's no way, do not get discouraged because you've had a fail, just there's a million people out there. So we live in the I live in the Metroplex. Yeah. My God, it's awesome. Limitless. Anyway.
All right, so we got 4 minutes left because Al has got beers to drink and charts to look at. So,
water, right, Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, sure. No, it was beer. Believe me, it was beer.
So, Clint, modified version of the Throwdown. Any takeaways for Ds or people in construction right now?
Yeah, you gotta stay on task, right? Just what you did in February of this year, you got to be doing right now. you do have to modify it. There's no doubt. I mean, you got to have a coronavirus filter of some sort in your business. And when this comes out, you need to make sure that the process you established in February is still there and up and running, right? And you pick right back up where you left off. And right now we're just trying to get through the times. Everybody's doing that. It's survival. Yeah. So survive.
All right. Al, for eyes or anybody in healthcare?
Keep your chin up. Worrisome times, but if you're constantly, like everybody's expressed, if you're constantly not just doing busy work, but constantly pushing to gamble on the recovery, to be there and be part of that in your industry, that's how I think you survive. And you come out, either the whole thing crashes and we all go to hell or whatever, or you're now known as a guy that was on the front line of trying to get your business back involved, get yourself back involved in enterprise. You just got to stay with that mindset and look for every opportunity to have a phone call, a conversation, move that needle forward in these trying times.
Good. Awesome. Nanette?
So survival, I just heard that from both of you, the D and the I. And I really think survival of the fittest, I thought, whoever said that, I thought that's so true. But what does that really mean? For me, it means survival of the fittest is spiritually, mentally, physically, and financially. So you're focusing, again, diversifying, build your strengths in all those 4 areas, be your fittest. And spiritual, find what that is. If you need to call me, call me. Mental, just think more positive, like we talk about all the time. Financially, I think that, just being really wise with your money, and man, it's hard when you're feeling like you're losing some at this point. Mm-hmm. And then, physically, of course, keep active, eat healthy. I think that all of that it plays into how well you're going to do in your business.
Yeah. I was going to...
By the way, Herbert Spencer coined the phrase survival of the fittest. I think Darwin made it famous, but he's not the one who coined it. So don't get your facts mixed up.
So for me, as a C and also as a consultant, the thing is, your sales process should be dialed in so tight that when you have that conversation, you're not as concerned about the outcome, right? The outcome is a lagging indicator that you don't have any control over. And when we get too attached to the outcome, that's where we start to slip and slide into like bad habits. And so writing out my sales process again, and like making sure that it's right here in front of me, the questions I must ask to determine a good fit, has really kind of increased the quality of the conversations I've had outside of that, because that allows me to be somewhat skeptical whenever someone comes because they want to talk about these things, but they don't fit, right? So if there's not a fit, I can be skeptical automatically. But whenever I'm too hopeful or too ahead of myself or trying to force something, that you lose the ability to be skeptical, right? And when you're not skeptical, you're too eager, right? And that has all sorts of problems in the long run for selling. So it's kind of my thing is just dial it back to as basic as you need to, and just make sure that you're doing it consistently. So awesome. Thanks so much for everyone who came to the Zoom.
There's my top sales guy coming in.
Just now?
12:45.
Love it. Go bite his ass, mister. What's he doing coming in so late?
So thanks for everyone who came to the Zoom. If you've been watching on Facebook, thank you so much. We'll be back next week. If you have questions, please send them to us. Follow us on social media. Share this with other people in sales who might be struggling. We're getting a lot of people who are reaching out about the assessments. So if you are taking this time to improve on yourself, then you want to take the assessment, let us know. We'll get you hooked up, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, be safe, guys. See you next week.
Cheers.